Topp 5 er i fare. Xabi Alonso til Chelsea og Mohamed Salah er på krigsstien igjen. Hvor skal dette ende for Liverpool? Vi hører med eksperten.
I've drummed it into our players that they are privileged to play for you.
Velkommen til pausepraten. Mitt navn er Jens Bessesen, og i dag har vi med oss reporter David Lynch, en av de som følger Liverpool aller tettest, og det er jo mye som skjer i den klubben nå, og mye vi ikke liker så godt. David, on behalf of all Liverpool fans, do you have some good news for us?
Do you think I'm going to tell you that the manager's about to go? Nothing really to report on that front. I mean, kind of the opposite, really. I guess the feeling we're getting and the talk that we're hearing around the club is nothing's moving on that front, which seems that, Liverpool is still back in their man, and I certainly don't expect anything to move before the Brentford game. Maybe they're just putting together the best bluff of all time, and once they get the other side of that final game of the season, then they will maybe make a change. But I really don't get that sense in reality, and I think they're still sticking by them.
Of course, today, latest news, Chelsea have just confirmed that Xabi Alonso will be their new manager from next season. The man a lot of Reds were hoping was going to replace Har Slot. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the thing is with Alonso, I know it's been a big thing on social media and just generally amongst fans. I mean, all sorts of fans who meet up will talk about that a lot, and it's been a real theme, kind of the idea that he's the perfect replacement. But I have to say, one of the reasons I've never personally kind of, even when in videos where I've been critical of Slot and maybe said that I think that the best route would be to go for a change, I haven't really spoken about Alonso or written about him, is because I've never really, from speaking to people around the club, got the impression that they were 100% convinced he was the man that they wanted, or they felt that he was the perfect fit for them. Now, I know some of the reasoning for that's been given from time to time is that, a back three, but I don't think that's fair or accurate, to be honest, because he's shown elsewhere that he's capable of playing different systems. I'm pretty sure he'll play different systems at Chelsea. And so I don't think it's that. I'm just not sure they're convinced that he is 100% an upgrade on Har Slot. And I understand people will laugh at that. But the reality is, I guess, is that, and I stand by this, I disagree with an awful lot Liverpool are doing at the moment, but I can see why they think this is a risk and that they are probably managers of a similar standard because, you look at the careers up to the point at which Xabi Alonso joins Real Madrid and Har Slot joins Liverpool, and they're broadly similar, to be honest. I mean, they win a league with a non-favourite, that being Feyenoord, who are probably the third best funded team in that league. Obviously, Leverkusen, it's huge because they haven't won it before, but they're one of the top sides. But obviously, to overhaul Bayern Munich is absolutely massive. They both reach a European final where they get beaten. Obviously, Slot's his only the Conference League final, but of course he is managing a Dutch side, so what's available to him is lesser. And for Xabi Alonso, that's the Europa League final, and they both win a domestic cup. So pretty similar CVs really. And if you do have a feeling that maybe Alonso does favour that 3-5-2, or you saw things and maybe they saw things at Real Madrid they didn't like, and they saw that Slot came to Liverpool and did win the Premier League, and that has to not be forgotten. By the way, I feel like people are brushing over that. You could make the argument, even if we all disagree, you could make the argument that the CVs are similar and Slot's got a Premier League on top. So I think that's what they're maybe thinking. And like I said, I never got the impression that they were going to go down that route, to be honest. It did feel really fan-driven. So not shocked that that's happened. But of course, there's a risk attached to it as well. And those risks are pretty obvious, I think.
And I think it hurts a bit more maybe that he goes to a rival. But I didn't think Alonso was the best candidate myself if we're going to replace Slot. And you have to question the decision to go to Chelsea as well. Wasn't that a bit of a risk from him instead of waiting for maybe a better opportunity?
You're exactly right. I mean, when you've been in the kind of clown show at Real Madrid that's going on there, you need your next job. You will have taken some damage from that reputationally. So you need your next job to be somewhere that's settled, that's a good place to be. And I mean, who gets that impression from Chelsea? I mean, I just think that is for the money they've spent, I think it's a pretty poor squad, to be honest. And so it's going to need some serious tweaks. And do you have faith that they will make those tweaks and get them right? I would say absolutely not. So they're in a bit of a mess. But then, of course, I guess, if you're Alonso, maybe his options felt a little thinned because, you're not going to go back to Germany. You've been in Spain just recently with Real Madrid and that's not worked out. You want to try the Premier League. City seem to be all in on Enzo Maresca. Liverpool have no interest in you. So maybe you're just kind of looking at what's there and that's where you settle. But I agree. I think it's a bit of a mad move from him, but if he makes it work, then it reflects well. And the risk from Liverpool's side, of course, is if it does go well, all hell's going to break loose amongst the fan base because they've missed that opportunity. And then, of course, when you do end up, and I suspect this is how this is going to go, the end up at the start of next season, not long into it, end up going into the managerial market. When you look at the options out there, you wouldn't mind surely to be picking from a managerial market that would have Xabi Alonso on it, just to have him as an option. That route is now closed off. So, the options they're going to have are going to be thinned even further. So, huge risk attached to just letting him go there without a fight.
As you said, it looks like Slot's going to stay on for the next season as well. But looking at the manager market, who do you think could be the other candidates if they choose to sack him now?
Honestly, really, really tough, because if they don't have faith in Alonso, I'd be really kind of interested to see who they do think would be the fit in that regard. Because as I say, we can play down his achievements and say, well, he's broadly similar to Slot minus the Premier League title, but then you look kind of what's beyond that, and that's not a great kind of list of options that you've got there. So I know Sebastian Hoeneß is someone they're keeping an eye on in terms of he's a developing coach that looks exciting, but again, are they fully convinced he could come into a club like Liverpool and do it? That's an unbelievable step, and his CV is not as impressive as Alonso's up to this point, who they weren't convinced by. They would absolutely, if a Luis Enrique were to come up, they would be all over that opportunity. And I think actually we mentioned his name when we did a podcast, kind of, was it November, December? I'm not sure. We did one in Red's Bar in town, and we talked about Luis Enrique. But of course, he seemingly, when you judge by the reports, he's on the verge of a new contract. So, Julian Nagelsmann is someone they've kept an eye on for a while, but of course he's tied up in the World Cup. So, and I mean, again, maybe that's something that comes into their thinking, is get the other side of the World Cup, maybe see how Slot starts the season. If not, he will be available to us. But it's not an unbelievable list of managers. That's why I say the Alonso thing is a risk, because the list that you can pick from looks more impressive when he is on it, and you feel like you've got better options there and you could take that chance on him. But it doesn't feel like it's a long list, really. I think Nagelsmann they've liked, Hoeneß they like, but big questions over the stepping up, and Luis Enrique unattainable. So outside of that, it's slim pickings, to be honest.
I think everyone I know and have spoken to say that it would be the best to get rid of him now. You've said the same thing. Why doesn't the club feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole thing, this has been the debate I've been having with myself almost the entire season. It's the debate that every fan has got to have, and I guess everybody's breaking point is that it comes at a different time, really. And so the conversation you have with yourself to get yourself to this point where you think a change would be best is, what's the mitigation that Liverpool have faced this season? What was the expectation, and where do those two things meet? And have what we've seen, is that justified by the mitigation? The fact that it's fallen short of our expectations, is it because of the mitigation, or does it go further than that? Now, I'm on the other side of that debate, in that I think that the mitigation doesn't justify how bad Liverpool have been. Not just fifth place finish. It can happen to Jurgen Klopp. It's things can go wrong. You can concede a lot of last minute goals, these sorts of things. It's not really necessarily to do with outcomes in terms of the results. For me, it's more performances. I mean, I'm looking at it's 37 games at the moment, but 38 game Premier League season there, and thinking, how many times have I seen Liverpool play well? And I mean, I literally probably count on one hand. And even then, I don't think a 90-minute performance in there. Now, for all the mitigation they've had, I think availability is poor at the moment in terms of injuries, but it's never been outright crisis up until this point. And so for the entirety of the season, even with the issues of, signing some wingers, which they need to do, some of the tweaks you need to make, it just shouldn't have been as bad as it has been, really, in my opinion. And that, that's where I stand. So, and that, like I say, certain fans will take longer to maybe get there, or will feel he deserves a little longer, and that's absolutely fine. We all have our opinions, but with the club, what amazes me is that they are so wed to the underlying stuff, to seeing the signs, to not just being obsessed with numbers. They do a lot of kind of actual genuine football scouting, and they've got football minds there. Richard Hughes was a player. Michael Edwards was a player. These are, guys who know what they're talking about with football. They're not just the nerds as they're always portrayed. And why they don't think the performances are an issue kind of baffles me, to be honest. Or the decision making, like, you could say McAllister's a big weakness, but he's played every game, and the manager's making that choice, and certain choices. Why they don't see that, honestly, I'm not sure. And I'd love them to do more to explain that. But that's another area I think is comms is where Liverpool have fallen short this season. So I'm not entirely sure what they're watching or what green shoots they're seeing, because it can't be in terms of the performance level, because what we have witnessed this season is, I could understand the start being bad, maybe the middle being bad, the fact that the end is bad as well, and there's just been, it's not just inconsistency, it's consistently awful in terms of the level of performance. And I nicked this phrase from a friend who I actually can't remember who said it, but they're like, Liverpool they never play well, they just win sometimes. And I could not agree with that statement more. The fact that they don't see it in that way is kind of amazing to me, really. And I'd love to know more about the line of thinking.
Looking at those higher up in the club, that's a bit worrying as well, because Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes, it's like Slot. They are like Slot on 1 year left on their contracts. Looks like Hughes is going to Saudi Arabia just after the transfer window this summer. So how can we be sure that they are committed to Liverpool FC?
Exactly, and this is my biggest concern about the situation, really, is that Richard Hughes is thinking, well, I'm going to leave after this transfer window. I personally haven't had that confirmed, but reading the tea leaves and from what I'm hearing, I'd be amazed if it doesn't just get to the other side of getting those signings done, and then we see a statement in maybe September that he's going to leave at the end of his contract, and then he goes on gardening leave effectively for a little while till he basically pops up in Saudi. So if he's thinking that at the moment, he's not thinking about the long term at Liverpool. Now, he's obviously not trying to damage Liverpool because he wants to maintain his reputation as a top operator. But equally, you'd be more inclined to think, okay, Arne, me and you, we've got our contracts till the end of the next season. Let's get through. I'll give you that start to the next season. If it doesn't work out, hey ho, it happens. I don't want to go through a whole managerial search on top of all the things that we have to do in the summer. And if I leave you with a good squad, then I think I've done my job, and that's fine. And that is my worry, is that, there's no long-term thinking there. It's kind of like, well, we can just stick by this guy because it gives me one less thing to do. And, that will kind of be the thinking around it. I find that incredibly concerning. And, the one thing I was positive about with Richard Hughes coming in is that I thought it would be an end to the revolving door on the sporting director's office. I thought, that's the whole reason a sporting director is supposed to be appointed, to give you continuity. And yet here we are, we're at the 3 years, he's going to go, you're going to have to do it again, probably have to do it again with a new manager as well. So it's like starting a new project. So tell you what, why not just give the manager control over transfers instead of doing this nonsense? Because who's giving us the blueprint here? Because the sporting director's in and out as well. So, he's supposed to give consistency and continuity and say to every different manager that comes in, this is how we play. These are the kind of players that we get to do that. And yet he's going to leave as well. So I find that absolutely maddening. And again, I was talking about comms. I find Richard Hughes' strategy in terms of, giving us very little to explain to supporters about how this is supposed to look and why they've made the decision they've made. I find that incredibly frustrating as well.
And also his decisions in the transfer market lost so many of the feel-good players, like Kelleher or Trent, of course, and Gerald Kwanzaa, local lad. Now we're losing Salah, Robertson, looking like Alisson is going to go, maybe Curtis Jones, Joe Gomez. I'm really worried about how the squad is going to look if that trend continues.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, what I would say about a lot of the sales and the departures is I think a lot of them are right in isolation. So, at Salah this season, for me, he's, as much as people want to say it's kind of a war against Slot, and you've still got to kind of, they keep playing him forever because they despise the manager. His legs to me have clearly gone. I think Andy Robertson is past his peak and probably needs to move on. And Liverpool need to find a new Robertson, a new Salah. They needed to find, so many of the sales you can justify. I think, they got good money for Queevy and Kelleher when he was ready to go and play more. Luis Diaz, the age he was in, the contract situation, it's an unbelievable fee. These are great sales and good decisions, I think, in terms of departures. But of course, they don't exist in isolation. And you have to follow that up then with another move, which is to ensure that whatever they brought to the squad is replaced in some way, or you get something different that it's brought to the squad that allows you to be just as good. And that, for me, is where Richard Hughes has just consistently failed, really. I mean, Queevy and Kelleher, for me, is he's a better player than Georgi Mamadashvili at this moment. So, the smart move, clearly, with Alisson where he's up to now with injuries, etc., would have been to rip the plaster off last season, to maybe move him on, and to say to Queevy and Kelleher, right, you've earned this, go for it. Because, like I say, Mamadashvili in the future, he might get that, but Kelleher is a better player now. Luis Diaz, great sale, but you don't replace him. So then Gakpo has to step up, and he's not that sort of player. He's never going to be that. He needs to be dipped in and out. Rio Engamo is not ready. And there are countless others, really, that just he kind of messed up that transition so badly, and that's the kind of huge question. Jarell Quansah, you sell him again. He wanted to go. It's a decent sale in terms of the money. You give yourself the buyback, and so in isolation, good sale. He wants to go play more football, but then you look really short at centre half. So you can't, these things in isolation, absolutely fine, but so consistently poor in terms of what follows that then. And I think that's what they deserve an awful lot of criticism for, because this squad is undeniably weaker than it was last season. And that's what a sporting director will be judged on.
But isn't that a combination of the club strategy and also Arne Slot's decisions to who he wants to play? Because Jarell Quansah probably, if he got a bit more playing time, would prefer to stay at his boyhood club than leave. And I feel like we're seeing a lot of that the players who care most about the club are not getting enough playing time, and then they decide to leave, and we buy a young French centre back for £60 million, who I'm sure is a big talent, but is it that much better than Quansah would have been in the squad?
Well, this is exactly it. I couldn't agree more with that, really, in that a lot of this is forced upon them as well because of decisions the manager made, as you say. Did Jarell Quansah after the Ipswich game have to get completely bombed in the way that he was? Because you're kind of watching that in Slot's first season, thinking, wow, this guy's ruthless. It's unbelievable. He wants the highest quality. And then you get into this season, you're like, well, no, he doesn't actually. It's just he seems to take against some players and really have his favourites in a way that's detrimental to the team almost, because we're seeing it repeated this season. The fact that Curtis Jones is getting pushed out of Liverpool at the age of 25, a local lad who cares, who's homegrown. And I know there's a bit of a debate about how good he is amongst supporters sometimes, but you look at the numbers and what he provides, and you rank him against other kind of midfielders of a similar age. He is elite. He may never be Steven Gerrard level, but to have someone of his ability who's, he can play that role and be an important part of his squad is massive to winning trophies. I look at Nicky Butt, Phil Neville, what they did for those Manchester United teams. And he's a better player than they were, by the way. Genuinely believe that. But, they were maybe not world class at their height, but they were absolutely able to play kind of 40, 50 games sometimes in a season and help you win big trophies. And you have a lad there in Curtis Jones who's willing to do it, but because he's had parts of the season where he's been bombed out completely, he wants to move on. And then they're going to grant him his wish now and be like, oh, well, he wanted to leave. That'll be the brief now. And again, no one, I will receive that when the sale goes through, is that, he wanted to leave for more minutes. We couldn't stand in his way. You created those conditions. And Curtis Jones will have sat on the bench for so many games this season watching Alexis McAllister running through treacle. And I just cannot, that's not ruthlessness from the manager, it's stupidity. And I think that's where you end up in situations like this where, as you say, you push Quansah to the door completely. Another one who he wanted to go, but would he have wanted to go if he was used a bit more? Probably not. Curtis Jones, exactly the same. And it's not in pursuit of this kind of higher performance level, because you are playing McAllister. You are ending up in situations where Canate is having to play through really poor form this season. That is madness, not clever decision making at all. And I can't understand it. And like you say, as much as that is kind of a club thing, and Richard Hughes with poor decisions, the manager's more than played his part as well.
We could mention Harvey Elliott as well, who had a season of his career destroyed at Aston Villa. So, but this weekend it looks like almost a mutiny is going on in the squad, because of course Mo Salah was out again, this time tweeting what looked like a kind of attack on Har Slot's tactics and lowered standards at the club. And Curtis Jones as well was out with a tweet, and it's been made a point that so many of the players have liked these posts as well. So what's your take on this? Is it another war going on between Salah and Slot?
One thing I would say about this is, I don't want to be overly critical of Salah, because, I mean, God, in terms of, earning the right to have an opinion on this stuff, I mean, he is one of the greatest Liverpool players of all time. So there's no doubt whatsoever he's earned his right. But one thing I don't like is like how kind of messy it's got around him this season, and how much he seems willing to kind of burn the whole thing down and try to take Slot down with him. Because, as I say, I truly do believe that he has, he's declined this season. And I do think there's an element of kind of him raging against the dying of the light in terms of this. He just, he's not happy about how things are playing out. And so he's kind of, creating a bit of a fuss with how he's been treated and whatnot. So I don't necessarily love all of that. But then you read what he's saying as well, and you've got to accept that you can both sides it and say there are valid points in there about the standards, the type of football, etc. The heavy metal football, I would say there's an irony to him saying that, because obviously his relationship with Jurgen at the end wasn't phenomenal. But he's generally right in that he's tapping into what fans think is that they don't want to see this style of football, which is pretty turgid, really, and has been since probably the second half of last season. So I think valid criticism there. I think valid criticisms about standards, the things we were talking about there, of like, oh, we have these incredibly high standards, we force these players out and then replace them with ones who couldn't lace the boots at the moment. So I think he's got a lot of good points, and the fan base will agree with him, because I think the majority want Har Slot to go. So yeah, I don't love that it's going on, but as I say, in terms of earning his right to say it, and the relevance of what he said, and probably just how right it is, it's difficult to argue with, to be honest.
And this time he maybe is in a better position to go out and attack the manager than he was in December, because then it was all in agreement. I think that Slot was maybe the winner of that when Salah did the interview after the Leeds game. But now I don't think Liverpool have won a game without him since Christmas. Maybe I won an FA Cup game or something. So he has better cards on his hands this time, I think.
I thought the Salah situation, I didn't like his reaction to being dropped. I thought, you've been dropped for 3 games, just relax. It doesn't need to be like this. Just get through to the end of the season. He didn't need to blow it up in that way, and I said that at the time. Equally, I think Slot was in the wrong, because I think, the idea he tried to pin it all on Salah's ruin our defensive structure. Well, they didn't play at Aston Villa, and they were an absolute disgrace in terms of, and they have been many, many times this season when Salah's not been on the pitch. So the idea that solved anything, and he had to go from kind of 0 to 60 in terms of Salah plays every game to now Salah doesn't play at all, and he didn't even want to bring him off the bench. I thought that was ridiculous, and a bit, it just showed his inexperience there, really. It was just unnecessarily petty, really, and kind of made it a bigger thing than it needed to be. And also, I think there's criticism there around that situation for the sporting hierarchy, that they thought, they misjudged giving him the contract. They misjudged whether he would accept ever being benched as well. They misjudged what they were going to get from him. So loads of blame to go around in terms of that situation. But it's never really kind of gone away, has it? And settled down. And I guess, we're still seeing the aftermath of that now. And I just kind of, it's sad that it's going this way, but it's, I think that's just one flashpoint in a season that's had a lot of them, and the fact that the players all seem to agree with this latest one as well is pretty damning, really.
And what about the clubs? Where the club is right now? I think we look more like Man United for the past 10 years, and it's incredible 1 year after everything was going so smoothly. How can they fix this?
Well, it just shows you that that's why you shouldn't rip it up completely in the way that they did over the summer. That was just foolish. And the fact that they spent years and years not doing that, clearly that was a Jurgen Klopp directive rather than anything from the people above him, that continuity was important, because, he was obviously massively wedded to that. And the moment that he's left, he just thought, right, we're going to just go absolutely crazy in the transfer market. And they've been shown immediately why that was an absolutely stupid idea, because it looks a mess. And I guess the only way out of this is to make good decisions in terms of the incomings again, to get the signings right. We've very little evidence that they got it right last time. I mean, how many of those summer signings have absolutely flown this season? Probably none. I mean, Ekitike, a bit up and down in terms of, getting used to the intensity of the Premier League, but he's been a very good signing, I'd say, outside of that injury. But the rest have had good moments, bad moments. In the case of Isak, mostly bad moments. In case of Wirtz, up and down, but never really truly world class. So it's been disappointing. So, what has to happen? I think Slot's right with what he says in terms of the other day of, a good window can fix a lot of things, and he's absolutely right. But of course, the same people are going to be overseeing this window as oversaw the last one. And so if it goes as well as that one did, and Slot fails to get the best out of those players that are added in the same way, then we're going to be having the same conversations again. So I don't have a lot of faith in it being turned around, but it can do. But you guys got to make good decisions again, and we haven't seen loads of those recently.
And I think a lot of the players who were signed during Klopp's era would maybe have been flops with a different manager. I think looking at Firmino, he was looking like a flop until Klopp got appointment. So I think that shows as well that you can sign good players, but they don't succeed without a good manager as well.
This is one of my biggest worries about going into another season with Har Slot as well, is that, you just know by the end of this season at this point, we will be seeing under Klopp the best of Wirtz. Nothing you could really do about Isak, but we would be seeing the best of Wirtz. I think Kerkez has been decent second half of the season, but there's so much more to come from him. I already think we would be starting to see that. We're not. And so, you're looking around, you're scratching around and saying, on that basis, how are the signings next? How are these signings that are going to come? I mean, how good are these guys going to have to be to fix all this? Is Slot going to be able to get the best of them? And you just don't have any faith in that. And you've nothing really to hang your hat on. And this is why so many fans have turned. What makes you feel that it's going to be better next season? Because watching Wirtz doesn't make me feel like it's going to be loads better next season. Watching Kerkez the same. The fact Isak can't get on the pitch. Ekitike is now gone. Watching Frimpong definitely doesn't make me feel like that. Because I think he's been mostly down more than up. And again, he's injury prone as well. So, and they're just going to add more signings that, again, you don't know what you're going to get from them. So, and there's nothing in the performances either. So, without a head coach, what are we looking at this from the outside? What are we supposed to think is going to suddenly be better next season? It's impossible to imagine that. And in fact, I think I've just cooked up my latest question for Slot in the press conference on Friday there, because I think that is the question. What are we supposed to be seeing here that would give us faith that it would be better?
And you've been asking him a couple of tough questions lately, I've heard on the press conferences. You, of course, watch him very closely for 2 years now. Has it changed, in your opinion, in how he acts or responds to those questions?
I think he's been getting a little bit more frustrated this season, which is understandable completely. I think he's faced down a lot of the tough questions generally quite well. I think one thing I would say in his defence is I think it's completely unfair that Richard Hughes doesn't front up at all. I mean, Har Slot is answering questions that are about strategy and above his pay grade, about his squad that he just can't answer because he's the man who's supposed to get the best out of them. Whereas a sporting director could and should be able to be a little bit more honest about these situations and could have got ahead of this situation, with briefing in the correct way, saying the right things in the build up to the season. But none of this has happened. And I think, so I think credit to Slot for that. And I don't think he has changed too much apart from probably being frustrated about being asked about it. But my biggest takeaway in terms of the comms and the press elements of it this season is just the silence from above and how unfair that is on Har Slot because he doesn't deserve this. And I think he's getting a lot more vitriol than he deserves around this. Well, full stop, because he's a title-winning manager, but also because he's being hung out to dry. And it's interesting from a journalistic perspective, just to kind of lift the curtain a little bit. You might notice where kind of some of the Liverpool stories are coming from these days, and I think it's really interesting. As far as I am aware, I don't think Richard Hughes has got a great relationship with pretty much any of the journalists who work here. And you might say, okay, well, I'm just telling you this now because it's like jealousy or why is he giving it to others instead of us? But I think there's value, surely. It's just sensible to me from a commerce perspective to have local journalists on side a little bit more, because when things do go south, it's far easier for them to turn to, not through kind of spite or bitterness to turn to kind of criticism, but because no one is giving you a better understanding of why this should be working better. And if Richard Hughes doesn't want to come and sit in a press conference in front of us and answer these tough questions, he's not the first sporting director who's refusing to do that. So whatever. But the comm strategy there, just get ahead of the game. Just be, if you tell Joycey or you tell me or look, this is why we're sticking with him. In a bit more detail, by the way, than just saying, we think there's mitigating factors. Like, are those why are the mitigating factors strong enough to write off the fact that for 37 games you played really, really poorly in the league? A bit more detail on that, put a bit more kind of flesh on the bone. You would get more balanced arguments out there. Whereas you look at and you read anyone who's writing about this, everyone's just hammering him, and rightly so, because we can't see it and we aren't. What are these visionaries who are in charge? What are they seeing that we aren't seeing? Well, tell us. Give us a clue. Give us something to kind of write about and say, and give us something to back it. Because at the moment we have nothing. And I think that's another one of the kind of mistakes that Richard Hughes has made. It's very, very low down the priority list. But he's got no one to kind of to fight their corner, really, because none of us can see it, and none of us are being given the tools to see it. So if they want to just work quietly behind closed doors and say that everything's going to be okay, well, that's all right if they believe that, and maybe they will be proven correct in the end. But getting other people to believe it just on the basis of kind of, okay, trust me, it's not going to work. So I think that's another kind of failure, really, is kind of the approach to comms around this season. And in fact, ahead of the season, managing expectations if they thought it was going to be like this. They did none of that. So if the sporting director had a better relationship with local journalists, I think we would all have a better understanding of what was going on.
And just to circle back on Alonso, because I think some journalists made a point that he's been appointed manager and not head coach, which could signalize that he's going to get more power than maybe the previous head coaches have done at Chelsea. So maybe that could be the way to go for Liverpool as well, to have a manager who makes more of the decisions.
I would think they would be very reluctant to do that under this hierarchy, to be honest. Obviously, Richard Hughes probably on his way, so it doesn't really matter with him. But I think with Michael Edwards, certainly one of the reasons he left the club initially was because he didn't like the fact that Jurgen Klopp was getting so much power and influence. And you could say there were good things and bad things to Jurgen eventually doing that. So, obviously it doesn't look like it was a bad thing now when we look back with how shambolic it is at the moment in terms of the decision making. But yeah, I did see the reporting from Carve Solocol, who I understand is quite close to Chelsea, saying that it was their choice to give him the manager title, not necessarily something he demanded. And I don't think it would have been a demand had he come to Liverpool. I think he would have been happy to work in the head coach format to come to Anfield. But the fact is, he didn't have that choice. And so that conversation didn't start. So I don't think that would have been an issue in terms of, Liverpool not wanting to give him too much power and him demanding this, that, and the other. I think he would have done anything to come to Liverpool, but he just wasn't an option because they didn't want him.
And now 1 week left of the season. Champions League qualification is still in the balance. Do you think we'll get it done?
I mean, if you look at the bookies, they're saying kind of like 90%, aren't they? Something like that still. So, and the bookies know better than me. That's why they make so much money. So, they feel a lot better about it than I do at the moment. I'll be honest. I mean, I look at Brighton, I look at Bournemouth as well. It's quite a scary prospect, really. I think it's a real possibility. I could see Brighton winning the next two. And if Liverpool lose to Brentford, that I think the goal difference is even now. So if Brighton win 2 and Liverpool lose 1, so they will. It's guaranteed they overtake them on goal difference. So that's not out of the question, given the form that Bournemouth are in, Brighton are in, that they could do it. So. And Brentford are already beaten Liverpool once this season, so and they are fighting for something in terms of European qualification themselves because 8th place gets it. So very, very concerned, I have to say. And the fact it's got to this point, says everything about how poorly Liverpool have finished this season. The fact we've seen no improvement whatsoever. So I do lean towards what the bookmakers are saying. They'll probably end up being right in the end, and Liverpool will scrape over the line. But very, very damning the way they're going to do it. The fact that they are going to finish 5th, that they'll have done it in such a pathetic way, to be honest, because of how they performed recently. It doesn't feel like something worth celebrating at all. And I mean, if it does end, if it's a key indicator that Slot is going to stay on, then I don't think any fans will be celebrating it.
So I asked for good news at the start. Didn't get many, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's not a lot to be happy about. And as I say, the worst thing, and I think the reason it's getting, the mood is so poor against supporters. What is there to be hopeful about? You don't going into this window being convinced there are smash hit signings coming that are definitely going to hit the ground running, because we haven't seen that last summer. You're not convinced you're going to see more from the signings of the summer before, because we haven't seen much of that at all. It's going to be, largely similar personnel in defence and midfield next season, and that the whole area has been a mess. So it's no wonder really that people don't believe it can change, because we aren't being given any signs that it could change. As I say, maybe Richard Hughes wants to give me a call and tell me and correct me on this, but I don't expect that either.
Thankfully, it's just football. So,
True.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time. We'll talk again soon.